Okay, Mark meets Mike Cooper, the worldwide CEO at PhD. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
Thanks for inviting me in.
No worries.
Can you give us a quick summary of your career to date?
Yeah, sure. I started off working at Saatchi Saatchi in 80 Charlotte Street in the early 1980s, in about 1983, 84. So I was very lucky, because it was an amazing agency to work at. And I worked there for about 6 years, and then...
What was your job title there?
I was initially a media assistant, which meant that I was a dog's body. And the guy I worked for was an old Harrovian who was the ex-schoolboy hammer throwing champion of Great Britain, and I think he just regarded having a media assistant as being an extension of fagging. So I just went out and got bacon sandwiches and parts for his motorcycle or whatever he fancied, really. So I really did start at the absolute very, very bottom.
That was your first job?
That was my very first job when I left university was a graduate trainee at Hewlett-Packard, where I lasted for 5 months, and I just realised that advertising was a much better option after a very short period of time. But it did give me an appreciation of advertising, because I know how dull the real world can be, or the world outside of advertising can be.
Yeah. So you spent 6 years at Saatchi.
Yeah, then I got a transfer with Saatchi's to Hong Kong, and I became the media director of Saatchi Saatchi in Hong Kong. And then after about a year, I became the regional media director, which meant sort of flying around doing pitches all over Asia, which when you were kind of like 27, 28 or whatever I was, 28 I suppose, was a great job. It was
single, no ties?
Single, no real ties, no, we managed to sort of avoid ties for a while, which was good. And then I ended up running the advertising agency. I got promoted to run Saatchi's in Hong Kong, which was quite a serious job actually, and I was still quite young. So I was running an agency of 100 people in Hong Kong, in about 1990. So that was kind of like quite interesting. Then I was there for another kind of 5 or 6 years or something, and then I went to work in television for a couple of years. I worked for CNBC Asia Pacific, doing distribution, ad sales, marketing, and things like that. And then in 1997, I got recruited by Omnicom to set up OMD in Asia Pacific, and I was the first employee of OMD in the world. So I sort of got in right at the very beginning of Omnicom's entry into sort of being a media specialist separation, or whatever you want to call it.
You were employee number one.
I was employee number one, yeah, which is bizarre, really.
And how many employees are there around the world now, roughly?
Across the group, I don't know, it's around about sort of 7,000, 8,000, I think. Yeah. So yes, it's sort of quite big, yeah. But because I've crossed over to PhD sort of 6 years ago now, I mean, people think of me as a PhD person. Nobody knows very few people know I'm an ex-OMD person.
What's the most embarrassing thing that's happened to you in your career so far? Is there a story when you've been at a pitch, an event, or a conference that is worth telling us about?
I think one of the most embarrassing things that ever happened to me was the week I took over running Saatchi Saatchi in Hong Kong. Literally to the day, it turned out that there was a thing called the 4As, which is the advertising association in Hong Kong. It's they kind of like use the American system there. And if you don't go to a certain number of meetings, you get kicked out. And if you get kicked out, it's quite bad news, because you're not an accredited advertising agency anymore, and lots of clients won't work with you. And so the week I took over, and I think this is probably by design actually, on the part of my competitors, we got thrown out of the 4As because my previous boss hadn't been to any of the meetings. So as literally the headline in the trade press out there, which is now called Campaign, it was then called Media, was Saatchi Saatchi ejected from 4As, which sort of rather overshadowed my first few weeks in the job. And I was trying to win an account at the time, and they made it one of the conditions of us getting the business that we got back into the 4As. But it wasn't the best start, I must admit. So that was fairly embarrassing.
Fine, that's a pretty low point to start with.
you have to sort of have a sense of humour in this business, yeah. And that tested mine.
What's the best bit of career advice you've been given?
I think the best piece of career advice, I'm not sure I've been given it, but I've kind of like learnt it myself. And I learnt it through bitter experience. I mean, to be absolutely honest with you, when I took over running an advertising agency, being a media guy, there were an awful lot of people that thought, this is just ridiculous. You know, a guy from a media background taking over an advertising agency. There was a lot of kind of like resistance to it. And my way of dealing with that was to sort of try and pretend for the first few months in the job to be my predecessor, because I was actually so scared. I felt so underqualified, and it was true. I mean, looking back, I wouldn't have given myself the job, to be absolutely honest with you. I mean, I was just so unqualified for it. And what I learned very quickly is that if you try and be somebody else, it never works. You know, so you've got to be yourself. So the best piece of advice I'd ever give to anybody is have the confidence to be yourself, because you can put in whatever role you're in because you are yourself, not because you're someone else.
When you first entered the industry at Saatchi's, apart from Saatchi, were there other agencies that you used to look up to?
Well, I've got to be honest with you there. I mean, the problem with working at Saatchi's in Charlotte Street at that time was they were doing so well.
It was the best place.
They were achieving global domination. So, you know, probably entirely incorrectly, I now realise, you know, we just tended to ignore all other competitors, and we were just ridiculously arrogant, which was kind of a joke because we were all really badly paid. But we were hopelessly arrogant, and that arrogance ran through the entire organisation, probably including media as well, actually. And, you know, we probably didn't have any justification for being as arrogant as we were, but because the headlines in campaign almost every week were, you know, Saatchi wins this, or Saatchi tops creative survey, or Saatchi acquires another great big company, I think we did believe we could walk on water, and then look what happened to Saatchi and Saatchi, you know, a few years later. So it never really worked.
So was this the time when both Saatchi brothers were involved in the agency?
Yeah, absolutely.
And was Martin Sorrell?
I can remember Martin Sorrell as the finance director. Yeah, I remember him sort of, you know, very youthful Martin Sorrell, kind of wandering around Saatchi's. But I mean, I was so young, I didn't have any kind of interaction. I just used to see these people in the lift. I did once stand on Charles Saatchi's dog's foot, which was the only contact I ever had with Charles Saatchi, so I'm not sure he would remember that. His dog might remember it, but he won't.
Yeah, fair enough. What advice would you give people that are looking to get into the industry today?
I always tell people who are thinking of getting into the advertising to read a number of books, and I tell them to start off with reading Confessions of an Advertising Man, and I tell them to read Disruption by Jean-Marie Drew, because I think that's one of the best books ever written on advertising, and I tell them to read Eat Big Fish by Adam Morgan. And I think if they read those three books, I mean, there's lots of other great books on advertising, but I think if they start off with those three, they get a very good idea of the business. And I think the most important thing you can tell somebody trying to get into advertising is that, you know, there's an enormous wealth of information and kind of contacts that you can make in the business, and what you want to avoid doing is just being another person waiting for an interview. You've got to find ways of standing out, and you've got to decide on a strategy and a technique to get into the business. And you know, I was talking to Scylla Snowball recently, who runs Abbott Mead Vickers, as you probably know, and she was telling me that 1 in 100 people that apply to them get a job. So you've just got to really find a way of getting those odds to be more in your favour. You know, if you really stand out, you can get yourself to be a 1 in 10. You know, if you apply for 10 different companies, then you've got, you know, a better than evens chance of getting a job. So, you know, I think the most single important thing is to impress upon people that they've got to make an impression, and they've got to go out and be go-getters, and they've got to read around, and they've got to have opinions about things, and they can't just turn up to an interview and, you know, tell the person interviewing them what they did in their holidays, or what, you know, societies at school they were president of, or whatever it happens to be. You know, they've got to stand out. So
the younger kind of grads and younger kids today that are coming into the industry are a lot more digitally aware compared to other generations. What is it about a media agency that can attract those guys coming here instead of going to an agency that is pure play digital or a big, I guess, BBH, for example?
I think, you know, it sounds like a cliche, but I mean, everything that we do in terms of digital these days is baked into a communication strategy. I mean, we don't think about social or digital. I mean, I didn't think about banning the word digital, actually, because I just got so fed up with people talking about digital this and digital that. I mean, you know, it's another medium, you know, it's another means, you know, that can work together in a kind of like a multimedia solution. But I mean, you know, paid, owned, earned media, whatever you want, however you want to describe it. I mean, we have to look at all of those things holistically, and we have to evaluate all of them together and their contribution together. So there are occasions when you're going to use various different aspects of those things. I mean, the way I would sort of sell it to somebody, if you want to learn about overall communications, including all kinds of what used to be called new media, I think you're going to get that best, frankly, at a media agency. Better than anywhere else, quite honestly. So I would, obviously some media agencies are better at it than others, but that's how I would sort of sell it to somebody looking to get into the business.
How many people work at PhD these days?
Around the world, about 3,000. I mean, here in London, it's, I think, about 260.
And do you hold a grad scheme here?
We do recruit grads. I mean, we recruit, I think, somewhere between sort of like 6 and 8 grads per year. We're quite active in having internship programs, so people can apply for internship programs, not just at PhD, but also at Drum and at Rocket, because we have a number of satellite companies. PhD was the first media agency in the world to have a content division. Back in, I think it was in 1995, 1995, we created Drum, which does branded content, which has been very successful for us, actually. And I think that's an area that's just, fascinating. I mean, I think for somebody, for a young person to go and work on shoots and to be making TV programs or involved in that area is just, fantastic. I'd definitely suggest, I think these days you have to have a few internships underneath your belt if you're serious about working in the business.
Placements, internships, whatever you want to call them, just some experience. Yeah,
and it's what you make of those things. I mean, I think one of the easiest ways to get into the business actually is to be an intern maybe after you've graduated and just focus on making yourself essential. Just really, really making yourself essential, and then it becomes relatively easy to convince somebody to actually start paying you properly. I mean, we do pay interns here. I don't know if that's unusual, but we do pay interns kind of like travelling expenses and kind of like things like that, and kind of like a small salary, because we just don't think people should really work for nothing. I mean, I think we're not going to sort of exploit people.
Yeah.
But I think an intern is a great way into the business, and it works both ways. It also helps people to decide whether it's what they really want to do or not, and they might get here and they might hate it.
For you, what's the best thing about agency life?
Best thing for me about agency life, and I mean, this sounds really, really corny, but it's never really seemed to me like work. Do you know what I mean? I mean, you have good days and you have bad days. I mean, there are days that, when you sometimes wish you hadn't kind of got up in the morning, but those are quite unusual. But generally speaking, I can honestly say, I think with pretty much all the jobs I've ever done in advertising, it's never really felt to me to be kind of like a drudge. And my father was a civil servant, and I used to watch him go off on the same train to Waterloo and come home every day at the same time. And I mean, there was just a sort of a greyness and a banality to the whole thing that, I've managed to sort of avoid. So, I mean, to me, that's just brilliant. I mean, that puts you miles and miles ahead of other professions.
And who inspires you? Who inspires you these days?
I'm very lucky at PhD because, I think, as we were the world's first planning-focused media agency, we've always attracted quite clever people, and some very clever people. And I mean, honestly, on a day-to-day basis, I mean, this sounds like a load of kind of, corporate nonsense, but, there are people within our company that really do truly inspire me on a day-to-day basis. And I'm kind of, although they technically work for me, I'm kind of in awe of them. So, as long as I don't tell them, I think I'll be all right.
So they don't know that? They don't know that you...
I think they do a bit, because you do, you kind of... But I mean, hopefully I'm kind of like good at some other things that, maybe they're not necessarily in awe of, but, they kind of have some sort of respect for. But, I mean, I do, when I see, I think it goes back to that whole thing about sort of not seeing the business as being like a job, just really kind of enjoy it. I mean, I genuinely get so much pleasure out of seeing a group of people working together, just producing amazing work, and then seeing it presented to a client. I mean, when you get that sweet spot, it doesn't always happen, it doesn't happen, sometimes it won't happen for several months, but when you get that sort of genuine sweet spot of seeing fantastic work and a client just being really excited by it, it's a really thrilling thing to have happen.
If you weren't in this industry, what do you think you'd be doing?
I honestly have absolutely no idea. I mean, I've been doing it now for nearly 30 years, so I really wouldn't have a clue.
What are your interests and hobbies outside of work?
My major is cycling. I'd actually, believe it or not, I do quite a lot of cycling. It's a bit cold at the moment, but I do quite a bit of cycling at the weekend. So, I kind of enter sort of, cycle races. I mean, I don't normally do very well in them, but, I'll do sort of like 100-kilometre kind of like trips and things like that. So that's the one thing. I do play a bit of golf, but I only play it for social reasons because I'm so bad at it that I just like. Was it Churchill said about golf? It's kind of like a nice walk in the country, interrupted by hitting a few balls. To me, it's just being with a bunch of mates and sort of taking the mickey out of each other. And the golf is almost a distraction. I can't stand playing with people that take it really seriously, which probably explains why I'm not very good at it because I never play with anybody who's any good.
What's the best brand you've had the pleasure of working on?
I worked on a hell of a lot of different brands.
The one that stands out over the years that...
We currently work a lot on Unilever, and I must admit, I like working on Unilever a lot because you meet some really inspiring people, particularly not just in the media area, but in the kind of brand management area.
That work for Unilever.
The most senior Unilever clients that we interact with. And what I love about them is that they have really, really big brands, in brands like Axe and Dove, and yet they will take quite adventurous communication strategies, which is a function of all the partners that they work with. But it's fundamentally, it's up to them. They take that risk. So things like the campaign for Real Beauty, which Dove did, or Dirt is Good, for the detergent brands. Those are challenger brand strategies. And I think for a really big brand, a big, multi-million, even billion, some of these brands are billion-dollar brands, to take a kind of like an adventurous, slightly kind of like risky strategy like that, that then, if it's executed well, will really kind of pay them back handsomely. I think that's quite inspiring actually, because you haven't taken the easy way out. You haven't done the same thing as everybody else does. Gets you whiter and all that sort of stuff. You've actually done something quite interesting and adventurous, and I think that's terrific. But I've been very lucky. I've worked on some great brands. We currently work on Porsche here. And I find them a really interesting bunch of guys to work with. I used to work on British Airways years ago, which I kind of really love. Actually, although we didn't have anything to do with it, I loved their Home Advantage campaign last year for the Olympics. I love that stay-at-home campaign. Stay at home, don't travel. Really brave. Really a great piece of communications.
Yeah, I loved that last year as well.
Yeah, I thought that just really stood out for me. I thought it was great.
It's interesting because I wanted to use that in a recruitment way, where I wanted to try and get a message out to people not to recruit, but to retain staff.
Yeah.
And it was very similar to the message that BA put out, don't fly, stay at home.
Yeah.
It's brilliant.
Well, I think just, most other airline advertising is, can be so kind of like boring. It's all pictures of sort of cabins and air stewardesses and, that's about it really, isn't it? And, a bit of food on a sort of tray. But, so that to me, that just cuts straight through. I love that. I thought that was great.
What's your favourite ad campaign of all time? It comes back to the same brand again. My favourite ad campaign is something that I worked on a bit. I was actually out in Hong Kong when I worked on British Airways, but my favourite ad campaign of all time was the BA Global campaign, which it's frighteningly old now. I think it goes back to 1990, but it was the ad that starts off with the swimmers, and it's the face that comes together, and. It was the sort of culmination of a campaign that had taken British Airways from being this state-owned enterprise that, was quite honestly not doing very well and had this dreadful reputation for lack of reliability and, just being at the sort of bottom end of the whole industry, to sort of like just taking it to the very, very top over the space of a few years. And I thought they were just kind of like fantastic ads. I thought they were really powerful, brave advertising. I thought it was stunning. Okay, let's move on to a quick fire round. One word answers. I thought we just had a quick fire round. That wasn't quick. That was 19 minutes. Olympic gold medal or an Oscar?
Olympic gold medal.
Creatives or suits?
Creative.
Apple or Android?
Apple.
Ant or deck?
Neither.
Spice Girls or Girls Aloud?
Girls Aloud.
Interesting. Facebook or Twitter?
Facebook.
The brightest person you've worked with?
Mark Holden.
The most creative person you've worked with?
Paul Arnold.
The best looking person you've worked with?
Jocelyn Chetwood.
Favourite flavour of crisps?
Don't eat crisps.
Take That or Westlife?
Neither.
Degree or no degree?
Doesn't matter.
The Only Way is Essex or Made in Chelsea?
I'm from West London, it's got to be Chelsea.
Retained work or pitch work?
I like doing pitch work. Doesn't pay well, but I like doing it.
Web or mobile?
Mobile.
Independent agencies or networked agencies?
Well, it's got to be network agencies, really, hasn't it?
Outsourced production or on-site production?
Combination of both.
Don Draper or Roger Sterling?
Oh, Don every time.
And lastly, twist or stick?
What's that supposed to be?
Anything you want it to mean.
Twist.
Thank you very much.
Okay, was that all right?